All right, very good. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this Zoom media conference and Facebook live stream. Today, Mayor Drew Dilkens is joined by Mr. Mark Galvin, the Chief Executive Officer for YQG International Airport, to discuss the impacts of the COVID-19 global pandemic on the airline industry. They are joined by representatives from our local media. Mayor Dilkens will provide some introductory remarks momentarily. Following this, the Mayor and Mr. Galvin will have a discussion accompanied by a slide presentation. We will conclude with questions from the media. A reminder that participants must turn your own microphone and camera on and off using the Zoom buttons on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Panelists, please ensure that your camera is enabled for the entire session, but only turn your microphone on when speaking. Media members, please use the chat function in the Zoom screen to request a question. And following the presentation and discussion, media members will be called on to ask questions and your microphone will be enabled at that time. Thank you for your attendance and participation today. Thank you for your willingness to use this technology. And I'll turn things over to Mayor Dilkens to start us off. Go ahead, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Dana. Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone joining us on the line today. As we continue to understand and navigate the impact of the global pandemic on our local economy, our businesses, and our entire way of life, conversations like this one today are important. I'm joined by Mark Galvin, who is our new CEO at YQG Windsor International Airport, to talk about the impact on the airline industry and specifically on our local airport. In responding to this public health crisis, our top priority has always been about protecting the health and safety of the public. And as this situation continues, the impact on our local economy is dramatic. Our border remains closed to all but essential traffic. Many businesses, of course, remain closed, with others beginning the process of reopening. There's no doubt these are challenging times for everyone, and it is by no means business as usual anywhere in the world. And that is certainly true for the global airline industry and for Windsor International Airport. Mark will get into some of the specifics today, but what is most relevant off the top is to note that at the present time, there are no commercial flights in and out of YQG. And that has, of course, a very big impact on our community. The Windsor International Airport, of course, is owned by the City of Windsor, operated by Your Quick Gateway, which is a federal share corporation of the city. And of course, the airport is a key transportation asset centrally located within the City of Windsor, which is the 16th largest census metropolitan area in Canada, with a population of about 420,000 people. Now, it is the only business and general aviation airport serving the surrounding community of Essex and Kent County, and situated on an international border between Canada and the US, and with a population approaching 7.7 million people within a 45-minute drive. Of course, YQG is a full-service airport maintaining the longest runway between Detroit and Toronto, and it is designated as the standby airport for major carriers like Air Canada. Now, YQG works with existing airline partners, Air Canada, Porter, WestJet, and Sunwing, to increase the number of destinations served and the frequency of flights, and have been doing a great job there for the past several years. YQG has worked tirelessly to increase passenger air service with an eye towards increased traffic volumes. There is no doubt our airport is also poised to develop as an integral component of a multimodal logistics system in the heart of the NAFTA trade corridor, especially with a new bridge being constructed. It boasts excellent accessibility and provides ample space for development and intermodal transshipments. YQG is close to major air, rail, and highway links on both sides of Canada and the US border, making it significantly desirable for commercial access to Canadian and North American locations. So while today we're talking specifically about and we're delving into the negative impacts of COVID-19 on the airport, we will also be talking about some of the opportunities that lie ahead, opportunities to showcase the resiliency and innovative spirit that we are known for here in Windsor, Essex. Today's update is an important chance to put all of these issues on the table, but before we get too far into the discussion of impacts and planning, I'll have Mark introduce himself and give an overview of YQG and his role there. Mark, thanks for sitting down today.
Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone online, and thank you for joining us. As the mayor mentioned, I started June 13th here, right when the coronavirus started, coincidentally. So it's been a challenging few months, not just obviously for YQG, but for the airline sector and the travel sector as a whole. I'm a Windsor born and bred person. I actually grew up I can almost see my house actually from my office here at the airport. I grew up just over on the other side of East Hero Expressway. So the airport's been a part of my DNA since I was young, walking to and from school, watching the planes land. Having the opportunity to have a positive impact in my community is something I've always wanted to do. With the exception of a few years in Toronto, I've lived in Essex County my whole life. So we have a small but dedicated team here at YQG. And while this is definitely an unprecedented time, a watershed moment, I think, in our history, we do look forward to the future and we do see some opportunities. It may take some time, but we certainly do. So thank you again, Mayor, for having me. And I guess we can get started.
Well, thank you, Mark. And as I mentioned at the start, no individual, no business, industry, city, province, or country has been immune to the impacts of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how the virus has affected the airline sector specifically.
Sure. And at the outset, let me say this: it's obviously not a YQG or Windsor problem. This is it's been a devastating impact to airlines, airports, and the travel sector as a whole across the entire globe. What started obviously in the Far East and in China with their flights being parked and airlines being parked gradually came across the globe. We've seen a 35 to 65% decline in passenger numbers, and frankly, I think that's understated because a lot of air carriers have reduced capacity significantly. In terms of when I say deep cuts, again, it's an understatement. Some have up to 100%, 70, 80, 90% have been common for North American carriers domestically. And it's not uncommon to have 100% internationally. Some carriers like Porter ceased operations exclusively. So that's obviously a deep cut into the industry. And we've seen declines all across the board. And obviously when you're running an airport, everything starts and ends with passenger traffic and flights. Parking, concessions, everything starts and ends with that. So when you have the reduction in flights, it becomes more difficult for the whole entire airport community. If you look at the next slide, we've seen that parked planes are something that we see everywhere in every airport. And Windsor obviously hosted a number of parked planes. We had up to like 12 Airbuses here at one time. And it's estimated that 17,000 of the 30,000 aircraft across the world have been parked. And obviously we're not unique, and we hosted a number of those. And there's a cost to those aircraft still. They have to be maintained and be on standby. But I do want to say this in terms of the airline sector. And I'm looking at the TSA numbers on the United States, particularly. They had their lowest point in mid-April. April 15th, I believe, was their lowest day, and it was about 87,000 passengers through the TSA checkpoint. May 31st, just a couple days ago, it was up to 350,000. So they've been gradually, slowly moving up as they go. Now, as a way of comparison, May 31st, 2019 had 2.5 million. So there is a ways to go, obviously, but there are signs that people are traveling again. And just yesterday in Bloomberg, Doug Parker, CEO of American Airlines, said that we believe the worst is behind us and we're on the uptick. And they're seeing those numbers gradually, slowly, but gradually increase. So there are signs, Mayor, that people are traveling again.
Well, that's good news. And I know, like many airports, Mark, that you and your team have been working to prepare our facility for the eventual return of higher volumes of passengers. And we know that in the pre-COVID world, we took a lot of experiences for granted, like walking through the airport to catch a flight at the start of a vacation or business trip. And just as we've experienced various levels of trepidation as we begin to revisit familiar restaurants and businesses, there's sure to be some fears and concerns for people as they think about heading back into airports and back onto airplanes. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the mitigation measures that are being put in place to ensure a safe and comfortable environment at YQG, and perhaps you can talk about what you'll be doing as time goes on.
Sure. We started actually planning for pandemic planning in mid-February. We started to have some meetings where we didn't really know what the impact would be, and I don't know if we would have called this in terms of how it would come to fruition. But we started increasing cleaning in scope and frequency. We actually put an Aegis hard coating on all of the hard surfaces, not only in the terminal but all in also our administrative areas. Hand sanitizers, which YQG actually didn't have before, that we installed all throughout the terminal. We put social distancing markers. We worked with the health unit in terms of increasing our signage and supplementing our signage to give the information to people about what really COVID was at a time when people didn't really understand. We're looking right now in terms of masks and making them mandatory. And if you see, Pearson actually made them mandatory as of June 1st. There are some, exemptions to that, and I think they're relevant. We're looking at that as well in terms of a policy for masks. And it really all comes down to making people feel a little more comfortable as they go from point A to point B. What we've found in terms of best practices is that it's not really any one thing that does the trick. It's a combination of efforts that help mitigate the risk, not only to visitors and passengers, but to staff as well. And then we have to monitor, the efficacy of everything that we employ, because it's important to continually look at what we're doing and make sure that what we're doing has some effect. There's always going to be new data. There's always going to be new things that we're going to have to respond to, and we're looking at every way, shape, and form where we can make every single aspect of the experience safer. We're looking at increased PPE, UV apparatuses. We've audited our own HVAC system to make sure that we have the best system that we can have. And also looking at areas where cleanliness can be improved that may not have been a traditional place that we clean, anywhere where people touch, and that's very important. In terms of continuous mitigation monitoring, and that's the next slide there, what we do is we have to continue to assess. We have to look at how we do things. But the reality is COVID-19 is everywhere. It's not simply an airport or airline issue. It may have been at the very beginning when this happened, where that was the migration of people coming to and fro across the globe. But at this point, it's everywhere. So I guess, Mayor, we're looking at more of a task-based approach, how we can improve every task where people congregate, where people interact with one another, how we can mitigate the exposure on a task-based level, whether it's masks, cashless systems, dedicated flow of traffic, dedicated in and outdoors, all to limit exposure, increase the confidence of the traveling public with a view to facilitate compliance and then restore confidence at the same time.
So I know and I appreciate that you mentioned the impact of COVID and that it goes far beyond airports or air travel, but I also know that you're at the table with industry leaders who are working together to analyze the challenges facing the entire industry. And I, of course, know that you're working to land on solutions that will make it possible for us to get where we need to go in a safe, reliable way as soon as we're able to do so. And as the pandemic has continued to play out, we know that the airport has hosted large Air Canada and Air Canada Rouge jets that needed somewhere to park because Toronto's Pearson Airport ran low on space. People have seen those planes coming in and out, and even most recently, planes that arrived last week down from the Boneyard in Arizona as flights are repositioned. And we know that the airport remains open for general and cargo aviation, but it's operating without commercial traffic and, of course, at significantly lower capacity. And in a typical year, really starting in 2015, we would see a dividend from the airport operations payable to the city of around $1 million. And that's significant. And I wonder if you can just talk to us a little bit about exactly how the pandemic has impacted YQG from that front.
Sure, Mayor. As you mentioned, since early April, there have been no commercial flights, and we actually closed the terminal, which saves some money, but also gives us a sort of a clean area. And we did a very robust cleaning right after the terminal was closed. Air Canada is scheduled to come back right now in early September, Porter in late July. But I have to say we're in close communication with our partners. We want to get them back as soon as possible, and YQG is ready to host them and ready to do so. So we have constant communication with our airline partners, including WestJet as well. But there obviously is some trepidation, as you mentioned, in terms of what capacities will be out there. We're seeing the trend in the United States of increasing passengers are starting to fly again. So it is sort of a wait and see kind of approach, but we are communicating with our airline partners to get them here as fast as possible, as safely as possible. So yes, there's obviously a revenue impact. We're not unique in that. YQG is not unique in that. Every airport has had that in terms of 50 to 70% revenue reduction. We still get other revenue in terms of lease revenue, general aviation revenue that you mentioned, but obviously everything, the engine that drives an airport is the commercial traffic and the passengers that go through it. But we've put an austerity measures approach in to save as much money as we possibly can, because we're cognizant of that we're city owned, and we want to keep doing those kinds of things. And then as we ramp up, then they'll ramp up our operation. But I also take the comments of recent comments of Federal Transport Minister Mark Garneau, who talked about air travel in Canada, and he said it's essential for this country. This is the second largest country on earth with its distances in remote areas, and we expect and need an airline industry in this country. And we're ready to service that airline industry and get them back here as soon as possible. This is unlike any other sort of natural disaster where it's highly localized. This has permeated every aspect and every sector. But even with that, Garneau also acknowledged that this sector has been hit disproportionately by the pandemic. So I guess, Mayor, we'll get through this, and I expect there'll be a few difficult months ahead, as we've had a few difficult months in the past. But we'll rebound as people get more comfortable in flying, just as they have done with similar tasks. In our society, you're seeing more people going out. You're seeing people more comfortable with putting their own PPE, or more comfortable with the measures they're taking in place. And I think air travel is really no different.
So, despite all of this, Mark, we know the day will come when we arrive at some sort of whatever that new normal is in all areas of our lives, including how we travel. And we're talking about the recovery process as well, and what that new normal might look like at YQG. Now, we know the time will come for us to take collective action when we get clearance from public health officials to rebuild the economy, which of course includes the airline industry as well. And you and the YQG team are already laying the foundation for that rebuild. And we know the people in the city, across the country, and around the world are always going to travel. And we know that travel, tourism, and all of the sectors that interact to help us get from point A to point B are going to regroup. And of course, they're going to forge a new path forward. So from your discussion with industry leaders, what can you tell us about how we will travel now? And what are some of the opportunities for smaller airports like YQG in the current climate in the post-COVID world?
Sure. And Mayor, I think you're quite right. I think, I was a traveler at 9/11 just before and right after. And we obviously saw a lot of changes at airports with 9/11. I think this will follow the same sort of pattern. We're going to see things that are done differently, and we'll become comfortable with that. The new normal will take place sort of organically. And one of the things I think that we can rely upon is that we're cognizant more than ever of a society how a pandemic or how a virus can spread and how it can devastate a global economy within a matter of weeks. So things like PPE availability, contact tracing, they all help us move forward to actually limit the exposure. And I don't think patrons will be surprised when they see masks on everyone, or when they're asked to move out of a traffic zone. They'll understand the why. They'll understand why they're being asked to do that. And I think there'll be a level of acceptance. We all believe there'll be a level of acceptance that's going to happen organically as we go through this. From our perspective, from YQG's perspective, we'll continue to repeat the implement, monitor, react, and change cycle for everything that we do to continually improve the passenger experience and increase our efficiency while doing so. And I think, as the slide says, we have to accept that the experience is going to change. And I think people will do that. I think they're already doing that. And even in terms of our society acceptance, we're accepting things that we might have kind of looked at askew a few months ago. So I think it's important also for air travel. It just becomes another part of your day that you take adequate precautions and you go from point A to point B. And I think you're right. And the next slide goes through a little bit over the future. I think it is in our DNA to travel. We for a smaller airport like YQG, there's some opportunity. And the reason that there's opportunity is we're a smaller airport that has fewer interactions and less exposure. People are likely going to gravitate to areas where they feel a little more comfortable. We're positioned to take advantage of our location and provide a less frenzied environment for travelers. And historically, obviously, we've had DTW across the border. That's a Delta hub, and we've had leakage from our local market through that large hub. We're going to do everything to give the passengers a reason to fly in and out of YQG. The reality is, a smaller airport gives you a little more efficiency, and it gives you less exposure, and it gives you a little more certainty. The things that we can do in a smaller terminal, a small airport, is going to be a little more difficult for larger airports to do. I also am cognizant of the federal government moving to allocate millions of dollars that were originally intended to attract foreign visitors to Canada, but a dedicated effort for Canadians to discover their own backyard, as they said. And typical with airline recovery, the business traveler returns first, domestic traveler return second, and then the international third. That's what happened after 9/11. So we're looking at promoting Canadian destinations through Windsor, and we're working with our airline partners to do so. And I guess as a final word on the future, we're constantly working with our airline partners to bring the service back, to offer routes, to offer local Canadians, Americans, offer everyone a choice here. But to do so as quickly, but also as safely as possible. The safety of the traveling public is paramount. And so I do think there's some opportunities that wouldn't have existed previously, with people wanting to perhaps fly locally from YQG, more comfortable staying within the boundaries of Canada. And we're going to try to do our best to provide that service.
Well, Mark, there's no doubt 2020 will go down as the summer of staycation, whether that's in your local backyard in Windsor, Essex, or certainly with Ontario and Canada. And I appreciate all the work that you and the team have been doing. I know Mark started just earlier this year, and it was very, very quickly thrust upon him as he's trying to figure out how to build the airport. It was figuring out how to shut it down and keep everyone safe. And now it's about rebuilding and making sure that we're strong as we rebuild. And there is no doubt there will be opportunities for our region as we navigate the current pandemic and as we evolve in the post-pandemic world. But it will take innovative thinking and patience and commitment. It will also involve some risk, and will require more than ever everyone to work together. And I've been saying this since this started, that our city and our region is like no other. We are continuously developing our economy, and the work that we're doing over the past little while is certainly proving vitally important to the present. We're needing to innovate and invest, and we're seeing how our work connects us, how our goals intersect, and how integral each piece of the puzzle is to the full picture of community health and well-being. We're leveraging the partnerships across all sectors of our local economy, particularly those hardest hit by the pandemic. And we are also going to continue to leverage our strategic location as the international gateway between Canada and the US. And I believe that more and more people will look to Canada, to the city of Windsor, and to YQG as a key piece of their travel itinerary going forward. So we will need the provincial and federal governments to continue to step forward with financial help to COVID-battered municipalities. Yesterday was a good sign from the Prime Minister that he sees the need for this to happen, and they accelerated the funding of some money that was planned to be given to municipalities later this year. They accelerated that. We'll be getting that in short order, but new money is needed. We know that. And we will come through this. And when we do, we will rebuild, and we will be better and stronger. And Mark, again, thank you for being part of a group of leaders working with us as we get to the other side of this global pandemic, this thing. With that, I will open it up to questions from the media. Dana, back to you.
Thanks very much, Mayor Dilkens. As mentioned, members of the media, at this time, if anyone has a question to pose either to Mayor Dilkens or to Mr. Mark Galvin, please go ahead and use the raise hand feature or indicate in the chat if you have a question. We don't have any hands so far. All right. The first question is from Rob Hindy with AM 800. Rob, go ahead and enable your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I guess from March until now, how many people usually use the airport? What kind of numbers are we seeing? The decrease, or obviously those travelers are no longer traveling. So what numbers do we usually see at this time?
Let me take that. Yeah. So last year, I believe we had about 350,000 passengers. So if you kind of take it, and our summer has been traditionally a little higher than that. So you're looking at it's a significant decline, obviously, when we're close to zero. But having said that, flights began to taper off actually a little earlier than that. So we had 7 departures down to 5, down to 3, down to 1. It's a little difficult from a year over, but if you take 350,000 people, I don't have the month-to-month numbers, but I certainly know we're usually a little higher in July and August. And our slower months tend to be January and February. So when we go right down to zero, obviously it's a huge impact. But again, I don't expect that when we start flying again, it's going to come right down to 7 flights. We're going to start with a couple of flights, and then they're going to gradually ramp up as the demand increases. And it really comes down to the demand, and that's why you've seen some trepidation in the airline industry Even in the United States, they still have capacity cuts, even though the passengers have come back, because they don't necessarily want to bring the planes back and fly them with 3 or 4 passengers on a 150-seat aircraft.
And just a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you mentioned Air Canada, September, that's their goal. If things improve, and like you said, you're in constant communication with them, could you see them changing up their game plan?
Well, that's what I'm hoping for. We prepared some data for them, and I sent it to them last week. I hope to talk to them this week. I think Windsor is a unique market. Traditionally, I talked about the leakage to DTW, and I, anecdotally, and people that talk to me, and a lot of people do call me, there is some trepidation of going over to the States to fly. And if they don't have an outlet here to do so, it makes it very difficult. Somebody might not want to do a 5 or 6 hour drive. So I think having that ability to fly from here is important. And obviously I'm talking with our airline partners to explain that. It's a little different because this is a situation that really hasn't existed before. So when you look at historical numbers, it's not always going to give you the full picture, because COVID's taken those numbers and thrown them out the window, particularly for a border town like Windsor, where we have this constant migration back and forth to the United States. Even if obviously that can't happen now. I don't know if there'll be another border closure, but even when the border opens, you have to kind of layer on top of that, how willing will people be willing to do that, or would they rather just fly out of their own backyard?
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and there are, further to Mark's point, I mean, there are still so many unknowns with respect to border openings, timings of that, the timing of that, whether or not there'll be requirements to self-quarantine for people coming across the border. But what we do know in terms of opportunity, as we mentioned, there are literally millions and millions of people within a 45-minute drive of this airport. And so with the dollar at a little over 40 cents, the US dollar a little over 40 cents, the business case was already quite strong for international travel for international passengers to fly from Windsor Airport compared to Detroit Metro. And so if it's easier and less expensive for them to get here, all things being equal, we're a very good choice. And that was some of the success that YQG has been seeing over the past several years, is passengers coming across the border flying from Windsor to connect internationally because of the price differential, which in some cases was literally 50% off when you do the comparison. And so I know Mark and the team are certainly working hard to try and position the airport to take advantage of our geographic location. And the fact that Air Canada has indicated September the 8th as a restart date, that we think that there is a great business opportunity for them to consider coming back earlier and making sure that YQG is part of the mix earlier than some of the other airports that they've also suspended service to until that time.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks for your question, Rob. Next, we'll go to Maureen Rive of Blackburn News. Maureen, go ahead and enable your microphone.
Hi, you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify some of the figures. You said we would usually be getting around $1 million right now with the first quarter dividend, and then there was about 50 to 70% impact on that number. Can you maybe dial it down a little bit? Do we have any more specific figures?
Yeah, so what I said was the $1 million dividend was an annual dividend that the airport provided to the city. And that dividend, for decades before that, there was no dividend. So because of the hard work that previous councils have done, and this particular council and the leadership of YQG, we were able to turn the airport operations around from being a drain on municipal coffers on a monthly basis to providing a $1 million annual dividend to the city starting in 2015. And so clearly, the magnitude of that dividend will be altered because of the complete closure of the airport for a period of time, the magnitude of which we just don't know yet until we have certainty on when things will start. So Porter has indicated an end of July start. Air Canada has said the 8th of September, and those dates are in flux. And so we think things will start picking up by then, but they may accelerate before those dates. They may be delays after those dates. And so until they actually start flying again, we won't have certainty for you on that, but we know that the $1 million dividend may be slightly altered this year because of the closure of the airport related to this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Maureen. The next question, forgive me, comes from Michelle Lusky at CTV. Michelle asks, is any revenue being generated as the planes are grounded?
Yeah, there is. We do get parking revenue from planes being grounded. That's about the only revenue. We do get obviously other sources of revenue from the airport in terms of lease revenue. There's a number of leases that we have with private partners, and we do get lease revenue. And we do get some additional revenue and miscellaneous sources. But obviously, the bulk of the revenue that the airport generates is either directly airside, what we call airside revenue in terms of landing fees and passenger facility fees, or revenue that's directly related to that, parking fees, concession fees that are sort of linked to passengers coming through the airport. So we do have revenue, but obviously the bulk of our revenue is tied up or linked to commercial traffic.
Thanks very much, Mark. That seems to be all the questions that we have from our media members. Forgive me, we have one more question coming in. Again, Rob Hindi. Rob, go ahead and enable your microphone.
Sorry, Dana, just one more quick question.
Yeah.
When it comes to staff at the airport, how has the staff been impacted? Are there, obviously the airlines have their own staff, but is there any city staff that has been laid off because of this?
Well, they're first of all, they're YQG staff, and we have had layoffs, and that's just a reality of this sector, but I can tell you that we worked with the union from the very beginning as this started. In fact, we have a standing weekly call with the union to update each other on our activities, and I think that's very important because I think people understand the impact. Our workers understood the impact. And the reality is we have a collective agreement that we followed to a T, actually, and worked with the union to make them as seamless as possible. The difficulty, obviously, we have, as the mayor pointed out, is that it's going to be a staged reopening as the flights come back. We're going to call people back as we need them, and I can't necessarily say it'll be, September 12th or. Now we can prepare for an opening, which we're preparing for, and we know how many staff we'll need at the outset. But as we ramp up, the staff will get called back. I think, working with the union and understanding that this is an unprecedented situation, being transparent and trying to do what's best for the workers, and that also includes the safety. So we're actually preparing for that as well in terms of PPE for the workers, in terms of different things that we're going to implement to make our workers safer. And we're working with the union on those things too. And there's not something that you're going to find in a current collective agreement because this has never happened before. So there's a lot of unprecedented water that we're treading, but we're doing it step by step. And we're making sure that what we're doing makes sense. So a reasoned action, but trying to act as swiftly as possible.
So as of now, how many members are off the job?
We had a layoff total of 35 of the 46. So we're down to a very, very skeleton crew. And that's just our reality when you close a terminal. Now, we still have a lot of obligations that we have to do in terms of Transport Canada, in terms of the runway, in terms of patrolling, because we are open, we're not closed. So we have staff that has to do that. And it does allow us, to kind of look at things and draft policies that we want to get in place and respond to this pandemic as we move forward. But it's challenging, obviously, because you want everyone back at work and you want to have the airport humming along like it was previously. But I think everybody understands that it's going to take some time for that to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Rob. That appears to be all of the questions from our members of the media. With that, Mayor Dilkens, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, Rob Hindi, because he asked 2 questions today, he gets the frequent flyer award, I think, Mark. So can we put a card in? No, I'm just teasing you. Thanks, guys, for all the questions. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Good things are going to happen at YQG. We'll get to the other side together. And Mark, thank you to you and your team as you help us navigate on the operations side over at YQG through this very difficult situation. Keep doing a good job over there. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you.